Y'all, I have just a little after 9:01, and so I'm going to welcome everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. I know that as we get closer to the end of May, that everybody in school-related business is busier because there's a lot to do in the month of May to close down one school year and to already be really fully invested in the school year to come as well. So thank y'all for being here today for our structured literacy transformation session. And today we're going to be focused on reading comprehension and writing. And so Sam, can I get you to click for us, please? Y'all notice we have a new picture in the middle. Of course, Anisha Donald is here. She is our partner at the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy. And y'all remember her. We've got Nick Philman here. He is the K-5 ELA coordinator in Marietta City Schools, but he's also on loan part of the time to the Department of Education working with our coaching model. And so we want to welcome Nick here today as well. So welcome, Nick, and we appreciate you being here with us. And then driving for us is Sam Murillo, and she is always our trusty behind the scenes person. Sam is in more meetings than I am. And we always appreciate her expertise. And she's the one that always makes sure that our recordings get in the right place and that we all have easy access to those. So thank you, Sam. And we want to know everybody who's here. And I see that many of you have already started putting your name and your RESA in the chat. So thank you for doing that. And I'm going to turn it over to Anisha.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. So glad that you are able to join us today. As Amy stated earlier, my name's Anisha Donald, and I am one of the instructional designers here at the Rollins Center in Cox Campus. So I just want to we always like to start our sessions talking a little bit about the Cox Campus Way. So if you'll go to the next slide. And so these are basically our 5 core values that Cox Campus is rooted in. And so we always want to make sure that your experience with us and with Cox Campus is rewarding for everyone. We want to empower everyone to secure a better future for our children, of course, especially in the area of language and literacy. We are committed to connecting with other change agents like you all here on the call today. We always want to provide a safe environment where you all feel welcome and accepted. And we are always rooted in solid research to help change practices and make a difference in the lives of children. So it's always our hope that whenever you're doing anything with Cox Campus or the Rollins Center, that you experience these values during our session today. And it's always an overall positive experience for you all. All right, so on the next slide, again, we always like to start our sessions. You know, many of you are returning, but we never know who's new in the room. So we always want to share that in order to have access to anything that we talk about today, any of the resources, any of the course guides, or any of the courses themselves, you have to be a member of Cox Campus. So if you haven't signed up for Cox Campus, please make sure you do. Again, we always like to reiterate for these sessions, it really is helpful to be able to fully participate and benefit from the sessions if you take the courses that we're talking about today. And so the way to do that is to join Cox Campus. And so I believe Sam just put a link in the chat if you need to join Cox Campus. All right, Amy, back to you.
Okay. So we decided we would keep the same icebreaker for this week that we did last month. And it says, what follow-up work, if any, has been done since our April session? So our April session focused on phonics and reading fluency. And I wonder if anybody's willing to come off of mute and maybe tell about thoughts that you've had since then, or if you've been able to do any work with any of your districts with that content, or plans you may have. And you can come off mute, or if you just want to drop something in the chat, that'll be fine. And I am going to be quiet. Wait time is hard in the virtual world.
Amy, at our last RESA specialist meeting, we were able to jump into some high impact routines for phonics. And what we did is we had videos that we had recorded and we watched videos, and then all of our specialists have created high impact routine lesson plans for small group phonics instruction that we can use in our upcoming coaching rounds in our next cycle of work. So we were really excited about that work and are looking forward to teaching it to our growing readers teachers.
Nice. That's awesome, Kathy. Thank you for sharing. Okay. If you have any other thoughts you want to put in the chat, we welcome you to do that. And Samantha will move on to the next slide. So we always want to just ground everybody in our purpose here today. And so, of course, the Georgia Early Literacy Act, or House Bill 538, and really our dyslexia legislation, Senate Bill 48, has created this, I don't know if it's a new sense of urgency in Georgia. I know that I'm preaching to the choir right now, but all of us on this call have been invested in this literacy work for a long time. But I do think that those pieces of legislation have really helped to create these common goals and a common language across our state. And so, of course, we're here to build practical knowledge and foundational literacy together, helping us create that really common language. And when we developed this particular learning community opportunity, it really was to cultivate and engage this leadership network. And so just another network of peers for you to be able to collaborate with and learn from. And of course, we want to set the foundation to prepare for the transformative change that we know is ahead of us. And it's so exciting it's really exciting to me to see that we're all speaking the same language and that we're all coming together and creating, I call it this net of support for the work that's happening in classrooms across our state. And so thank you for being here and being part of that purpose with us today. And now let's take a look at our session objectives. And I see that we're going to first reflect a little bit on, we didn't change phonics and reading fluency. No. We're reflecting on phonics and reading fluency today. We're reflecting on reading comprehension and writing today. And we want to lean into what that looks like when implemented at school. And so we have our real life scenarios. And we want to help prepare you to lead and support this work in your RESA. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Anisha, and we will get busy with reading comprehension.
Thank you, Amy. So the first thing we're going to share, which we always do, is the Reading Comprehension Course Guide. This course guide is really helpful. It's a really helpful resource to use with teachers and leaders to revisit the learning from the course and to really kind of begin to take that knowledge into practice. So we always share the course guides because it can help you all to support the implementation of the evidence-based practices that are covered in each of the courses. All right. Next slide. So as you all know, we always like to do just a quick kind of review, so to speak, to kind of help everyone in the room. Some of you may need it, some of you may not, but we like to try to meet the needs of everyone in the room. So we're just going to do a three-question quiz about the content that was in the reading comprehension course. So number 1. It says language comprehension and reading comprehension are separate processes. Is that true or false? Language comprehension and reading comprehension are separate processes. True or false? I'm seeing a lot of falses come into the chat. Very good. The answer is false. Language is essential for comprehension. Oral language and reading, they really kind of have this important reciprocal relationship. And when you think about it in the early years, early language drives that reading development. And so then later in life, reading really, the more you read, the more it drives that growth in language. So they definitely are important, and they, kind of build on each other. So the answer is false. If you could click that for me, Sam, and then go to number 2, thank you. Comprehension strategy instruction should be both explicit and contextualized within a larger knowledge building purpose. True or false? All right, all the truths coming in. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, the answer is true. Yes. So here, one thing I do want to say here, when we think about strategy instruction, I think sometimes we automatically start to think about teaching strategies in isolation, right? And I do think that when we talk about verbiage, sometimes the word strategy has gotten a bad rap, to be quite honest. But I want to make it clear and known that strategy instruction is a good thing. Students need it, right? The important thing is that it should be explicit. So students need to know why the strategy is important and when to actually apply the strategy. And so when we talk about contextualize, it's about not teaching the strategy in isolation. The strategy isn't the goal, right? At the end of the day, the strategy needs to be connected to meaning or content. And so strategy instruction really should be something that gives readers this tool for their larger goal of building knowledge, because that's the goal of reading comprehension, is to build knowledge. It's the goal of reading overall. So I just kind of want to make that known here. Strategy is not a bad word at all. All right, number 3, teachers can actively mediate the text for students before, during, and after a reading of text. True or false? All right, excellent. All the truths are coming in. That answer is also true. Teachers play an essential role as active mediators of the text by helping students to facilitate those comprehension processes, right? And so teachers really engage students to think critically and scaffold comprehension through planning their text, selecting high quality text in order to meet whatever the purpose of the lesson is. So teachers definitely play an active role in all parts of reading a text. All right, great job. Next slide. So we always, kind of want to just remind you that throughout these sessions, we're always mainly going to be kind of talking about course content, something specific to a course. And so we always kind of want to remind you, as we're discussing these scenarios around reading comprehension and writing, we want you to be thinking about things that are coming up for you from the course. Anything interesting, anything that connected with you, any questions that are still bubbling up, kind of always keep those in the back of your mind when we're talking about the scenarios today and the resources. All right, so let's get into our first scenario. Here we go. During a district walkthrough, you attend a PLC where the instructional coaches are helping teachers plan a 4-week-long unit about main idea and details. During the unit, teachers will read multiple books for the purpose of identifying the main idea and details. How can you advise coaches to shift the focus from strategy-based units towards knowledge-building units for their comprehension instruction? So again, when we talk about strategy-based units, right now these teachers are teaching these strategies in isolation. They're not connecting it to knowledge at all. So how can you get teachers to make that shift? What might be some things that you are doing or have done or might do?
So, Anisha, I'll help monitor the chat with you, and we've got an integrate with content.
Okay. Jen, can you expound on that a little bit more? Integrate with content, what that might look like? Nicole said, I would ask if they have considered using text sets. Okay. Oh, she got laryngitis. I'm sorry, Jen. Okay. Use text.
Text set answers there. I wonder if Nick wants to talk about this at all. He did a great job of talking about it on one of our knowledge building sessions a few weeks ago.
Sure. Yeah. First, I want to call out that this scenario could easily be called "You are a literacy coach in 2016. Now you are a literacy coach in 2024." Because I previously 100% helped teachers do exactly the top part of this scenario. So I think it's always important to own that shift. I think the first step is really kind of two things. Number one, seeing what knowledge links already exist between the books that they've been selecting. Because while selecting books to build knowledge may not have been their intent, it is highly likely that some of the books have a content knowledge through line. So finding those and then really leaning into how can we build out a remaining text set by replacing some of these books that aren't building that same knowledge, but not completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And also at the same time, looking at the books where we do land and seeing what other comprehension strategies and skills would kids need to access the knowledge inside of those books. So adding on other strategies along with just main idea and detail so that it's not a 4-week unit on main idea and detail, I feel like is a great first step of building the knowledge, but then using the strategy, skills, and standards to access that knowledge. So really just shifting the focus. It's not really is the biggest undertaking there.
A couple of other chats. Anne Marie says, use text sets and encourage using different strategies when needed while building background knowledge. And I think that that's a really important point, that it's hard to just stick with one strategy for a long time, because different text sets require different strategies for really accessing that text.
And teachers are really already doing that. A lot of times it's just naming explicitly the strategy that you're teaching them. Because even though you say you're spending 4 weeks on main idea and detail, you know you're also asking quality questions. Like, you know you're already doing these other things. Make them an explicit and formal part of the instruction.
Nick, I appreciated you talking about kind of looking at what they are already doing, right? So kind of like starting with what's there and not necessarily throwing everything out, because I think that's a big deal when we're talking about trying to make this shift to structured literacy. Teachers, I feel like, have this thought of, here we go, another pendulum swing. I've got to, get rid of everything. And so I think it's about building on what they're doing versus kind of just trying to recreate something. So I appreciate you lifting that.
Really important.
Yeah. Christy says, so true, Amy, and different students need different strategies to develop the same skills. Very great point, Christy. Great point. And I think just being reminded of, when it comes to the goal of reading, is to make meaning. That is the goal at the end of the day. And so as long as that's happening in a variety of ways, that's what we want. All right, let's move to our second scenario. I'm sorry.
I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Yes.
I was just going to remind everybody that one of the resources that was available was the comprehension lesson framework, and I think maybe I can even drop that into the chat.
Yeah.
So just as a reminder. Okay, sorry, Anisha, take it away.
No, you're totally fine. I actually have the link right here, Amy. So I'm glad you brought that up. So let me go ahead and put that in the chat. Okay. All right, so scenario number 2. A school principal is concerned with how the 3rd grade students performed on their benchmark assessments. The principal asks for ideas to help the students work on overall reading comprehension instruction. How do you support this principal while helping them understand that reading comprehension is an unconstrained skill? So in the course, it talks about unconstrained skills and what they are. And so pretty much this idea of reading comprehension, it's not necessarily like, all right, check, I finished reading comprehension, I've learned it. this unconstrained skill is something that's always going to be growing and happening. Even into adulthood, we're going to continuously be learning and comprehending. So how do you support this principal with their concern of these benchmark assessments, but get them to also understand that this is something that's always going to be ongoing? It's not a stop at the end of a benchmark.
I had this in one of my schools a few years ago, and but I think the biggest part that principal happened to be missing was the K2 piece. It's not just, it doesn't just start in third grade. He was missing the strength that needed to be in those foundational skills, and the importance of that read aloud and the shared reading and all of those other, you know, important pieces to go on. And then again, the shift in third grade to where they feel like the kids should be, you know, in this instance, the principal felt that the children should all be doing that work, and that the teacher, you know, was backing off instead of being a part, like that question we had a few minutes ago. The teachers it's so important that teacher's a part of all of those, you know, even when, you know, after they've given that explicit instruction and the children are reading, that importance for them conferring and building each individual students and pulling those small groups and attacking it in there. So it's a huge piece, I think. I don't think there's one small part.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Leslie, for highlighting that. I appreciate it. And, you know, you brought up a point where you're talking about how the teacher still needs to be involved, even once the student is reading and reading fluently. Absolutely. To help with visualizing, right? And creating those mental models in their head. And so teachers, they're always involved before, during, and after. And I think that kind of highlights the point of this is not just a one and done, or just a, you know, it stops at a certain grade level, or it stops at a certain benchmark. This is something that's ongoing. Kelly says, I think it would be important to help the principal understand how all grades have a role in creating and strengthening comprehension within his school. Therefore, vertical planning and discussions could help to understand everyone's role, as well as tackling how to effectively integrate skills with content. Excellent point, Kelly. Love the point that you make about vertical planning. It's so important. It's so important.
I wanted to follow up on the vertical part and also mention the horizontal nature of reading comprehension. Principals, of course, are tasked with leading an entire building. So mapping out where all the different reading comprehension aspects play out across not only the academic content areas, but specials areas, social emotional areas, being able to have productive oral exchanges during cafeteria, pickup, drop off, like all the places that reading really is global and doesn't just live within inside like an ELA block of a classroom.
Yes. Great point, Nick. Thank you.
Nick, that makes me think about like with reading comprehension being an unconstrained skill. I remember when my son went to high school, and he was a good reader. He had great reading skills and was a reader, but he took an AP economics class, and he had to really learn some new skills to attack the articles that his teacher was requiring him. And I'm telling you, it was frustrating to him initially to have to learn those new skills, because he really felt like, you know, he felt like he had arrived and that he had finished learning to read well, and he had to learn some new skills. And so we focus a lot right now on early literacy, because that's what our legislation is driving. But in thinking about that vertical look with reading comprehension and it being an unconstrained skill, there are a lot of things for us to consider for our middle school students and our high school students as they begin to encounter much more rigorous texts that may require a new skill set for them.
Yep.
Yeah, Amy, I think that's a great point. I think it just, again, it kind of reiterates this idea that comprehension is always expanding and it's always deepening, and it grows throughout our lifetime, you know, well beyond 12th grade. And I think one of the things that was also highlighted in the course is about this as a reader, whether we're an early reader or, you know, we're a reader into adulthood, reading comprehension is really a concept. It's not a concept that you're taught, but it's something that you create depending on whatever, you know, whatever you're trying to gain meaning from and gain understanding from. And that's just a lifelong thing that's going to be. All right. Moving right along. So let's go to the coaching tool for reading comprehension. And I do want us to take some time to look at this tool. So Sam's going to put the link in the chat for us. And hopefully everybody can access that. And so I want to give maybe about 3 minutes for you to just kind of look over the coaching tool, and then we can talk a little bit about it. So one of the things that we always say in our knowledge building sessions, and I've also shared with you all here, is that our coaching tools are comprehensive, meaning they are, they include, you know, different things from different courses. So we talk about equity of voice with oral language. We talk about systematic and explicit instruction from our phonics course. And so you'll always see that kind of at the beginning of all of our coaching tools. But then as you scroll down, you'll see the section where it talks explicitly about reading comprehension. So that's the section that I kind of want you to look at. Take a moment to kind of just peruse and just kind of think through, you know, when I'm looking at these practices, what's firmly in place already in my RESA? What may be a stretch goal for me in my RESA? What might be the first step? So I'll stop talking now. I'll give you about 2 minutes to kind of just look at the tool, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. All right. Do we have any initial thoughts about the comprehension tool itself or anything on the reading comprehension tool?
One of the things that stands out to me is that the primary method for building language comprehension in K through 2 is read aloud. And I think our principals need to see that, because it's becoming just a practice that is not included in these literacy times in schools. And it is hugely important, and how the teacher facilitates that read aloud is hugely important. So I'm glad it's on there, and I think it's really important that we communicate that across this state as a critical component of reading instruction.
That's a great point, Kathy. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Read alouds are essential, not even in the K2 space. To me, I feel like you could do read alouds with adults and it could be beneficial, right? So no, that's a great point.
Yeah, that's a good point, Anisha. It's really the primary part that shifts to me from K2 to upper grades. That instructional read alouds are a vital component of all instruction. I feel like, honestly, K12. But in this primary space, they're the primary method.
Yes.
That Kathy's right, we can't lose. I think the skill that teachers have to develop, and coaches, everybody, is distinguishing between an instructional read aloud and like a pleasure read aloud. That neither of them are off the table. They just serve distinct purposes.
That's a great point, Nick. That's a great point. I love that. Leslie says, I love that the balance of teacher talk and student is one of the first things on the list. Student talk is so important. Yes. And that goes back to my point, Leslie, of when you look at all of our tools, you will see that balance of teacher talk and student talk is on every single tool, because it is so important, no matter what the content is. Yes. And we recognize that, and we agree. Absolutely.
And I would say that that's another thing that principals need to have a clear understanding of. When I walk into a classroom and hear children talking,
Mhm.
especially if it's intentional language that they're using in their conversations, that is instruction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a huge mantra for me, is that I have a really hard time if I walk in a classroom and the kids aren't talking. I have a
Mhm.
really hard time believing that there's reading and writing instruction really happening.
Mm,
Honestly, an assessment is about the only time
mm,
that there should not be productive chatter or
mhm.
productive noise. Yeah, April, I love that label for sure.
so y'all, a couple of times in this conversation, it has come up with how important it is for our building level leaders to deeply understand this content. And so I wonder if you all are having opportunities out in the different RESAs to engage with leaders in this way, or is most of the work being focused on teachers?
Mm.
That's a good question.
Well, I would say just from the growing readers perspective, we have multiple opportunities to engage with administrators. It's a part of our work. We have administrator sessions that we hold. We do learning walks within the school to help them know what the intentional instruction that they're seeing and the things that they're hearing. And we have conversations with them about their data and so forth. So we do have those opportunities. And I know somebody a group that may not be represented here, but might be a group that could have some impact on this are the RESA school improvement specialists.
Mm.
Because again, when you think about those folks, they are working directly with teachers and leaders in the buildings. And, that's just another route to get the message out very, very clearly. And I know our ELA specialists at the RESAs are having conversations. So, I mean, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I think that is something, and having these tools like Kelly York said, that's going to help them visualize what they should be seeing in classrooms. So I think it's a great resource for all of us in the roles we're playing.
Kathy, I love that you mentioned the school improvement specialists who are connected with our SDI division. Did I say that right? Yes, I think I did say that right. We're actually going to do the same thing that we've been doing with you all with the structured literacy transformation with our SDI division over the course of next year. And so hopefully that's just going to add another layer of collaboration and that common language that I always.
Yeah, and it might even be that you include the RESA school improvement specialist in that, so that they're hearing that same message. I mean,
Mhm.
that would be great. That's amazing.
Great point.
Agree.
And one of the things I want to add to kind of what Kathy was saying and also what Kelly said in the chat is that when we are creating, these specific tools, we do sometimes, I guess, get feedback that, there's a lot on the tool and we don't want to overwhelm teachers and things of that nature. And that's understandable. But we also try to make a point to let leaders know, to let teachers know that it is not an expectation that we are looking for all of this at one time, right? And I'm sure I've said that in the other sessions, but I think it, warrants repetition, that we're not looking for everything at one time. And we also want to try to be as clear and explicit as possible so that anyone can pick this up, whether it's a leader who may not have some of that background, to help them to understand what they should be looking for, what that should look like. That's why we have certain links, to the PAT strategy and, the comprehension lesson framework, because we do want leaders especially to know what they should be looking for when they go into these classrooms, even if they don't necessarily have the full background knowledge of whatever it should look like. And so there's a method to that, right? There's a method as to why it's as lengthy as it is. And when you see the writing one, it's going to be even lengthier. So I just want to kind of always reiterate that when it comes to certain tools.
Hey,
And
Anisha,
Anisha, I hate to be talking so much, but
Oh,
I
no.
have to say, I think it's a wonderful thing that you just said that the tool is comprehensive. And what we
Mhm.
have to understand and what we have to communicate to administrators is our first thing is not to walk into classrooms and look for these things.
Mhm.
Our first thing is to determine what support is needed for teachers to implement these things effectively in their classroom, because the support piece is the largest part. And that's why I believe that's why you called it a coaching tool,
Mhm.
not a checklist,
Right.
not a focus walk, not
Exactly.
some sort of evaluation.
Right.
This is a coaching tool so that we can determine what support is needed to help teachers do this work,
Mhm.
because that's what's missing,
Yep.
that support part.
mhm.
Yep.
The tool itself can also serve a really nice function of coaching for the principals and the leaders in the building. I think one of the most powerful, so in Marietta, during all of our cycles, the first meeting is always an admin overview. And part of that is looking at this type of tool and going through line by line and discussing what all these terms mean and what it
Mhm.
looks like in a classroom. There
Mhm.
have been so many opportunities where we've gotten to debate and argue in some instances about wording because you have to do that on the front end behind the scenes before any of us are deployed out into classrooms. Because
Mhm.
if we aren't speaking the same language and calling things the same thing, then there's no way that our takeaways from the classrooms are going to be consistent. And consistency then breeds usefulness.
Absolutely.
I
I
love what Marcella said in the chat about that the really unique work that Reese's have. She says our work opens the door for us to have intentional and ongoing conversations with teachers and
Mm,
leaders. And
mhm.
so navigating that in between space, and I do
Mhm.
think that y'all are uniquely situated to do that. Great comment, Marcella. And I
I
love, Leslie, the bringing everybody together for these conversations.
Mhm.
Good.
yes. And just before we move on quickly, I do also want to just highlight Kelly's second point about chunking and chewing and normalizing going slow to speed up. I think that is so important. And here at Rollins, we kind of just when we're talking about partnering with different people, we say kind of at minimum it takes about 3 years to see change, to see real solid systematic change. And so that takes time, but it's so well worth it. And I agree, Kelly, about normalizing that, because sometimes we get caught up in trying to get things done too quickly and then nothing happens. And so you're kind of just in this hamster wheel of ineffectiveness. So thank you for highlighting that as well. All right, so to wrap up the reading comprehension space, we are going to share a link to the Jamboard. We always like to do this so that you all can have a space where you put in writing some things that maybe you're going to start, stop, continue, change, maybe update based off of the conversation here today. The whole purpose, of us coming together is to, just talk about things that are happening and in our prospective Reeses and what we're doing or what needs to be done. So we always want to have a space where you guys can put in writing some of the things that you're going to be thinking about as you leave this space today and working on. So if you could go ahead and open up that Jamboard and just maybe share a few things based off of the conversation that we've had so far that you might want to do. And Sam, is it possible for you to share that on the screen, the Jamboard? Thank you so much.
I love that.
And in case you guys didn't see it, Jamboard is going away on October 1st. It likes to remind me that every time.
Mhm.
All right, so I see share coaching tool with instructional coaches to plan for intentional areas of support. Excellent. Continue highlighting the importance of read alouds. Yes. Love that. And of course, you guys know that you can, this is gonna stay up here, so please add to it because we always share that after the session so you all can see kind of what others are planning to do as well. Plan for and model read aloud.
Wow.
Read alouds. I love that. And I think that's a good point. Like, I think teachers need to know what read aloud instruction looks like and what that entails.
Collaboration and planning effective TL and modeling with instructional coaches to help build capacity of coaches as well as teachers. I love that. I think sometimes we forget that sometimes our coaches might need those opportunities to see quality modeling as well. Love that.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah, you can't coach what you don't know.
Absolutely.
These are great, y'all. So many.
Yes, I love it.
I look at that in change. Support principals with supporting before monitoring. That's
That's a big one.
Yes.
That's a big one. I do just want to kind of pose this to the group. When it comes to that point, supporting principals with supporting before monitoring, is it an issue with time? Is that why maybe principals show up that way of they have to just monitor right away versus slowing down to speed up? What do you think is the barrier there that principals kind of go straight to evaluation versus let's take some time to just teach and support versus evaluating right away? Is it TEKS?
I think sometimes it's priority,
Okay.
but also instructional understanding, because we still have some principals that are not necessarily that instructional mindset,
Okay.
and so they don't know. And so that's where, we need to continue just working with those school leaders to build their knowledge and capacity. So, and I love that.
I think there's a systems level component too that has to shift because principals often live in this pressure of ROI. And so they feel tasked with immediately there was a training. Now my job is to make sure the training is translating. And their mindset can't change until the system that they're living within also changes. This was a foundational change during our first year of rollout in Marietta. Was we were doing a module, and then immediately the next round we were back in the building, we were doing walkthroughs with this type of monitoring tool. We were seeing diminishing returns where there were people who were knocking it out of the park or people who just weren't doing it at all. There was very little middle ground. And what we landed on, and really through conversations with teachers and implementation teams to figure out, was that it was that immediacy that made it where nobody was willing to risk take. If they felt comfortable with it, then they took it on. If they felt any sort of hesitation at doing it right, then they just didn't do it. Not because they were like actively resisting, but because they were scared, to be honest. So we found a really big payoff in staggering those instead. So doing a training the next month, like providing support on that training and layering in a new piece. And then the following cycle, doing the monitoring piece for what happened 2 cycles ago instead of cycle monitor.
Great point, Nick. And I think that space that you talk about where it's so that return on investment is so quick, they don't want to take the risk, right? But when they have that time, that space, and that opportunity, they're more willing to because it's not a negative connotation kind of behind it. I like that.
Also, can you all hear me?
Yes. Hey, Nicole.
Hi. I'm thinking back to when I was a coach, like a literacy coach. I sometimes felt like, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I sometimes felt like my principal felt like that wasn't their role. Like it was my role to support and it was their role to evaluate. So they evaluated and then they told me, hey, this teacher needs this, go do a coaching cycle with them. And so it was kind of became this culture of I support, you do the evaluating as a leader.
Great point, Nicole. That's a great point. So I think to that point, and I think Leslie said it earlier as well, we are still working on kind of the changing the mindsets of leaders as well, right? Because I'm sure there are also leaders who, kind of say, well, this is not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up to, so that's just a mindset shift for everyone. And then again, that takes time. It won't happen
Mhm.
overnight.
And let me say, I have also had leaders that were very instructionally sound,
Yeah.
and did walks with me and planned coaching cycles and actually supported. So, like you said, for some, it's just a mindset shift, but
Mhm.
there are leaders out there that are actually supporting before monitoring.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Great point.
That's a reminder that one size does not fit all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you so, so much for the engagement with reading comprehension. And so we're going to move on to writing so that we can stick to our time and make sure you guys get out of here on time. All right. So again, Sam, if you will drop the writing course guide for everyone, just so they will have it. Thank you so much. All right, so let's get into our quick review of writing, true or false. All right, so the first one says, rubrics can be an effective way to improve students' writing. True or false? All right. Looks as if all the truths have it. Very good. Absolutely, that answer is true. Teachers can teach students to give and receive feedback through rubrics, right? And teaching rubrics to students, really doing it like line by line, and then gradually introducing all these essential elements that should be included in their writing, so that students understand how to use it, right? And how to use the rubric, and including those elements of content as well as convention elements. All of that can help students to improve their writing. Absolutely. All right, number 2, handwriting instruction has no effect on students' writing fluency. I feel like handwriting can be a bit of a point of contention for some. All right, but everyone is saying false. All right, excellent. False is the answer. When students receive that handwriting instruction, the quality and influence of their writing definitely improves overall. And one of the points that it talked about in the course is that when students can fluently and automatically form those words on the page, it frees up their cognitive space for the higher level writing skills. So it's really important when students are bogged down in trying to form a certain letter, then they don't have as much cognitive space. So it really can improve their writing fluency. All right, number 3, writing instruction should only happen during designated writing time. Of course, that answer is false. Writing should be integrated all throughout the day, integrated into the material that students are learning all throughout today. Of course, it's going to be happening, during phonics instruction, that small group instruction, the literacy workstations, but it also needs to be happening in all content areas, right? In all subjects. And so it definitely needs to be happening all throughout the day.
Hey,
All
Anisha,
right. Yes,
do you mind if I insert a really quick additional true false?
please.
Just with today's overall piece in mind.
Yes.
Okay, so true false. Reading comprehension and written expression are distinct and separate skill sets. Yes. Yes, with the false. We know they serve a reciprocal relationship, right?
Mhm.
So while they are two different modules within Cox Campus, while they are taken on as two different whatever training platform, because they deserve their own focus, they are not distinct from one another. They are duly reinforcing.
Absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out, Nick. Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. So let's move on. Again, we always just remind you, please bring any thoughts, ideas, connections, questions from the course to the conversation as it comes up for you. All right, and let's get into this first scenario around writing. All right, so scenario 1, if we'll move to the next slide for me, Sam. Thank you. It says, in a PLC meeting, The instructional coach observes that some teachers believe students only need to be exposed to good writing to learn how to write organically.
Mhm.
They feel that by just reading, analyzing high quality texts, and lots of time writing, students will be able to naturally apply these elements to their own work. How can you help these teachers see the importance of explicit instruction in writing as well? So what are your thoughts? They think that they just need to be exposed to it. That's all they need. High quality text, maybe doing some read alouds.
Hey, Anisha.
Hey, Lindsay.
Wasn't that the thinking behind balanced literacy as well, with exposure to text before structured literacy came along, that if we just kind of expose them to a bunch of books, then they're going to be able to read?
Yeah.
So same thing with writing. It has to be explicitly taught.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for making that point, Lindsay. And here's the thing I will say, this is not to say that exposing them is bad. Absolutely not. But the point is, it can't just stop there.
Mhm.
So my question, to you all is, how do you get them? Again, we're making that shift. How do you get them to take it further to provide that explicit instruction in writing? And it doesn't just stop at exposure.
One of my responses is snarky, but also real, is find me another content area that you would say that about. Would you sit a child in a math classroom, talk about math, and assume that they would become proficient at mathematics by just seeing lots of good problems solved? No. Would you sit them in a music classroom? Would you send them even to PE and let them watch people play basketball, really high level basketball, and then hand them a basketball and expect them to be proficient? I feel like no other content area would we say that about.
Yeah. I also feel like with writing, it feels like it's easier to kind of say, like, because writing can be very like subjective, and it's very kind of open-ended. It's easier to say they can just kind of pick it up through looking at different authors. And so to your point, I think when you kind of connected to another subject that is maybe feeling more definitive to people, it's like, well, I never thought about it that way. So that's a good point, Nick.
If y'all don't mind, I would love to make just a small point that I think I taught in a balanced literacy classroom when I was coaching. Probably I was coaching 20 years ago. And one of the things that I think is happening across the country is we're placing a bit of a generalization on balanced literacy that I think is inaccurate and in some ways unfair. And I am not by any means trying to cause trouble. What I am saying is that when I taught writing explicitly. And and this was in a balanced literacy classroom. Yes, I gave them exposure to high quality text, but what I taught them was what the author did within that text to create a complex, balanced character. The actions, the motivate. I taught those things, the skills and the strategies that they used. And so whereas I do agree that what you're saying on this scenario is absolutely true, I think we need to be cautious as leaders of the work, not to completely focus on our attention to this, not that, because the problem with balanced literacy is it wasn't implemented the way it was intended in every classroom across the nation. And people got stuck on maybe one part of it, and they forgot or did not know that there were other parts of it. It's the same thing to me, structured literacy. If we don't make sure that we're talking about comprehension and writing like we are today, we're going to end up with just kids who can call words. And so I love that we are having the comprehension conversation today because it's so critical. So I just think it's just that we need to be cautious about how we communicate. And it's just not a trouble causing statement. just the reality that we've already got so much dissension. Let's build community around this work.
Mhm.
I agree, Kathy, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I do think, and I'll just be very transparent. I sometimes will hear certain statements where people will make a blanket statement about, balanced literacy is bad or balanced literacy is wrong. And I do feel like that can be an unfair statement depending on who you're talking about, right? So I agree. And I think it is important to kind of name specifically what those evidence-based practices look like, because the reality is there are certain evidence-based practices that are under balanced literacy for some people that still work in a
Mhm.
structured literacy environment. And so I think it's important to make that point known. And again, for this scenario, I don't want it to come off as if we're saying, get rid of all things that are attached to balanced literacy. But we are saying when it comes to exposure teaching, no, that's not enough.
Well,
Right.
and Anisha, one of the things that this course points out is that kids should be reading books that are 95 to 98% accurate. And so that is something that we did in balanced literacy, and maybe it needed to be shifted.
Mhm.
And I think people are going to be more likely to shift if they're not, you were wrong doing balanced
Yeah.
literacy.
Yes.
Mhm.
Now do this, because
Yeah.
you just lose people in
I
that
agree.
situation. So that was
So
my
if I
point. Thank
can
you.
Pipe in just for a minute, Kathy, in response to what you're saying.
Sure.
I hope you didn't hear me saying that balanced literacy is bad. Anybody that works with me knows that I tell them exactly what you're saying, that there's pieces of balance that are good. There's pieces of structure that are good. We cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater and tell them everything you've done is bad. We've got to change it to all structured. I agree. What you said that is key, that is missing, is done with fidelity, balanced is good. Done with fidelity, structured is good. The problem is what was said was we need to teach kids that the way to write is through explicit instruction, as you did in your classroom, Kathy, but as many teachers are not doing. So we cannot just
Mhm.
expose them to books and
Mhm.
expect them to read, expose them to a basketball and expect them to play,
Yeah.
expose them to a writing exemplar and expect them to write. That was the point.
Exactly. No, and
Mhm.
the only reason I spoke up about that is it's what Anne Marie said in the chat, that people are confusing whole language and balanced literacy. Whole language is what this scenario is all about. Balanced literacy, the intent was to pull away from whole language and do explicit instruction. So agree
Yeah.
completely. And I appreciate the conversation. Thank
For
you
sure.
all.
I really like your point, Kathy, about also looking backwards at learning lessons from that shift when we are when we are strengthening these structured literacy practices, because it is entirely possible that if we aren't careful, that we can unintentionally cause the same thing with structured literacy,
Yeah.
that we can, yes, we've got to be sure that our definition and discussions of structured literacy are comprehensive and involve the entire rope, so that we don't shift the pendulum, whereas balanced literacy never got mislabeled or stopped being mislabeled as whole language, that structured literacy doesn't become mislabeled as phonics.
And that's the point. Thank you. And that was
Yep.
my only point, Lindsay. I did not hear you saying balanced literacy was bad. I just wanted to make that point because I think we're going to get more traction
Yep.
in that if we do that, Nick, and
Mhm.
really value the work that's been done in the past
Yeah.
and grow from it.
Mhm.
I have to leave. I'm sorry. Thanks so much for the conversation, though.
Thank
I
you,
always
Kathy.
appreciate these meetings, ladies and gent.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Yes, I agree. And I'm looking at what people are saying in the chat. Absolutely. And it sounds like, a lot of us are on the same page of not necessarily kind of driving this narrative that, all things balanced literacy are terrible and, and different things like that. I think it's just about naming what does need to change and what that looks like. And to the point of this scenario, when it comes to exposure teaching, whether it's in writing, phonics, whatever it may be, that does not work. And so I won't even call it balanced literacy, right? I'm just going to say exposure teaching, really, and that incidental teaching that students will kind of just pick it up. And that's the point we're trying to make here, is that it has to be explicit, right? Whatever it is. All right, so let's move on to our second scenario. Scenario number 2. While conducting a walkthrough at a school, you learn that many of the teachers don't assess writing. They feel that writing is subjective and can't be properly assessed. How can you help these teachers understand the important purpose of assessment in writing? So I think this is another one. We talk about writing being open, subjective, and when it comes to assessment, well, how can I properly assess writing if it's just open? So what does that look like?
This makes
Sure.
me think about in one of our recent specialist meetings we read those crash courses. The people that's shaking their head, they know what I'm talking about, right? And those books about each goal area. And it made me think about or let me not say goal area, each aspect of reading comprehension, like theme, plot, and setting, characters, right? And
Mhm.
so this made me think about that because one of the I guess examples she uses, like you don't necessarily have to know I mean, you know, when you're watching a Law and Order episode, if you're 20 minutes in, that whoever the suspect is probably not going to be that person because you got 40 minutes left of this episode, right? And so, like, to me, it just makes me think back to that of like, a lot of times teachers don't feel comfortable teaching writing because they don't feel comfortable assessing writing or teaching it
Mhm.
because a lot of times it's focused on grammar and conventions, and they don't feel comfortable with the structure of it, right? So if I'm assessing a narrative writing, do I understand the structure of a narrative piece and the pieces and components that are supposed to be in there
Mhm.
versus assessing, like, you know, with my red pen, for lack of a better term, all these different grammatical errors and blah blah blah, right?
Yes.
I just think a part of that comes from comfort and understanding and knowledge from the teacher around how to assess writing, whether it's, you know, narrative, subjective or not. What am I looking for? And that
Mhm.
goes back to rubrics and all these other things, but I'm not gonna go down there. You
Mhm.
But thank you, Nicole, for highlighting that point of, us not being comfortable kind of with writing, and so to assess it, it can be a little bit daunting for some people. But also, you talked about, when we know what we're looking for exactly, which that's the whole purpose of rubrics, right? That helps us to make it less subjective, and now we're looking for certain elements.
Mhm.
Nick, you said show them the way of writing.
I mean, it's a reality.
Yeah. Yes.
But separate from that, I think also it makes it less subjective. It also makes it less global. So people who aren't completely comfortable taking on like all of writing, the
Mhm.
assessment part of it can tell you which piece to start with.
Mm.
Because I have found with teachers with writing, that's the hardest piece and it's different than math in that math is very like finite sub skills. You can easily see those, whereas a piece of writing looks really global and it's sometimes harder to dig down and see the individual skills. So the assessment part of it gives you a starting point. I have also found this really interesting trend that really good writers themselves find it more difficult to teach writing because it comes so natural as a person
I can see
that
that.
then as a teacher it's harder to find out like what's missing, why aren't you able to do it, and
Yeah.
the rubric can really help you with that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, the rubric I really think is the thing wherever you get that rubric from, whether you get it, from GMAS or whatever, that kind of helps you to solidify what you're looking for, like to Nick's point, where to even start. The rubric really can be helpful, especially thinking about kind of like that backwards design. You use thinking with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
What are you trying to get students to do, and then how do you get them there? Can be really helpful. Trying to see if any other.
Nisha, I see Lynn's hand up.
Oh, hey Lynn, you want to come off mute?
Hi.
Hey.
Yes, I want to make a comment. I actually do work with school improvement, but I'm a former English teacher, and so I'm doing the literacy training. And so I just want to add in that teacher clarity is an excellent means in all content areas, but specifically with writing. I actually had a lot of experience with this because I was still working in a school system, and we were on the CSI list. And so what I found as a former English teacher is that once we established our learning intentions and the success criteria, then that really helped me specify and help my teachers specify, this is what we're looking for. We're looking for a hook. We're looking
Mhm.
for a thesis statement. We're looking for 3 supporting details. So, having taught in a classroom for 21 years, it was like an epiphany for me. I'm going, man, I made this so difficult all those years because I was looking at the whole document and trying to, red pen the document.
Yeah.
Whereas with teacher clarity, I tell the students, this is what we're doing today. And we're going to write a paragraph, and this is what we're looking for. So, I mean, that was a life changer for me in writing instructions. So I can't emphasize that enough. And our teachers found that it really saved time when grading writing. This is what we're looking for, and really narrowed down the focus. So I just wanted to add that comment. And as you know, teacher clarity is high impact practice that we really push in school improvement area.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Lynn. I really appreciate that. And I think, just to kind of add to that whole idea of teacher clarity, so using the rubric to help provide that teacher clarity, and then maybe even, when it comes to coaching around whatever that is that the teachers need clarity on before they expecting them to, teach whatever is on the said rubric. So that goes back to Nicole's point of if they're not comfortable, maybe I don't know, teaching students how to write a thesis, right? Well, then maybe they receive some coaching in that area so that they can become a little bit more comfortable with it in order to showcase that to students. A point that I want to highlight that Lindsay brought up is it's hard to get teachers to look past the grammar issues of a writing assignment and judge the content. And Lindsay, I think that is absolutely 100%. Yes, the case. And that kind of reminds me, going back to earlier when we were talking about providing kind of this idea of when you're teaching the rubric to students and showing them what you're expecting, you do show them the content, but you also show them those conventions as well. You show them what that should look like, what the expectation is. And so it's not that we're not looking at that, but it has its place, right? And so I think that's, sometimes hard to get teachers to look at both, but there's a time and place when depending on what you're focused on at the moment, but they both matter and they both will be evaluated in some way, but not necessarily at the same time. That's the point. So thank you for lifting that up. All right, so let's move on to our coaching tool for writing, because I do want to give everybody an opportunity to review the coaching tool. So I think Sam had to step away for just a second. So I'm going to put the coaching tool in the chat for us. All right. So if you all will just take a moment, I'll give you about 3 minutes to kind of open up the coaching tool, look that over, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Again, it's comprehensive, so you're going to see those first 2 sections that are going to be similar: equity of voice, systematic and explicit instruction. But then if you look at that 3rd section where it says writing development, go ahead and just check that out for a few minutes and then we'll come back. Sam, we're on the next slide if you're back. Go ahead, Nick. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I was going to say, if you don't mind, I want to add an additional little reflection piece while
Yes.
people have this thought time.
Yes.
I know that we typically focus on the content of the tool and kind of what's in place in the different districts and regions. I'm also curious for this population specifically to think through what similar tools, like coaching tool / form or process that you currently have in place that is similar to this in some way. So think meta about the tool itself as well.
Thank you, Nick. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the writing coaching tool. Any initial thoughts, especially what Nick pointed out as far as, are there other tools that you all utilize when it comes to implementation and kind of the content of writing that you all might use? Any thoughts? I know I told you all that this one was a little bit longer, and hopefully you all can see that when we talk about this specific tool, we try to provide more context on this tool. So, when we're talking about writing development and what should be happening at the different stages of writing, right? So what early writers should be doing, what mastering the basics, and what that looks like. We tried to put some of that context on the actual tool so you would know what that expectation is, and not instead of just listing the verbiage.
If I can put my MCS hat on for a second, I will say that this was one of the biggest undertakings for us as a district, was a shift to a tool similar to Rollins's coaching tool for writing specifically. We were strongly a units of study district when it came to writing. Reading, not as much, it was spotty, but writing, we felt like we had on lock. Of course, like everybody else, we saw that we weren't getting the return from the students for the unlockness that we had as adults. So shifting from the units of study classroom kind of walkthrough observation documents that we had developed, which were very aligned with that earlier scenario. Like it was all about, are the kids given ample time to write, or does the teacher like scaffold too much? So it was a major shift for us. And the trick there was shifting away from that holistic whole language type walkthrough, but not shifting all the way to it becoming a TEKS walkthrough.
Yes.
Finding that middle ground of observing and coaching explicit writing instruction without it becoming a formal evaluation. It was I don't know if anybody else has experienced the same type of like tightrope piece, but it was an undertaking. It was a process.
Yeah. Nick, can you talk a little bit about, since you brought up the TEKS piece, because that's a big deal. So what did that look like for you all? How did you make that adjustment? Because it reminds me of going back to the conversation earlier where we talked about coaching versus evaluation, right? The time for both. So what did that look like?
It really went back to the principal mindset part of it, because principals have a lot to do. And we insist that the principals are a part of all of these classroom walkthroughs from a coaching standpoint during our SOAR coaching cycles. And of course, so in their minds, they were like, great, I can get it to double duty. I can walk through with you and it can count for my TEKS evaluation. And just talking through why that is not productive and that we don't get the best out of our teachers in this coaching space when it's also being used evaluatively. And getting the principals and the coach to own and understand the two different hats that those live inside of. So we draw a bright red line between any type of coaching walkthrough and a formal evaluation walkthrough. So much so that we don't even, I can't, man, it's for everybody, but in Marietta, we've literally landed on the fact that anything that is discussed during a coaching walkthrough does not migrate on the principal's end over into that like mid and end of year conference unless the teacher brings it in.
Okay.
If the teacher uses it as like evidence for meeting certain TEKS standards, that's fine. But yeah, we have it's a very black and white, the difference between a coaching walkthrough and a TEKS formal evaluation.
I like, and it creates a very, very much even more like a safe space of being able to, it's kind of, I really like that. That's a great practice.
There are some great comments in the chat, y'all. Some of it is around the clarity and how we keep coming back to teacher clarity.
Yes.
Crescenda talks about that the tool includes building a community of writers and the importance of that. That academic discourse, students being able to talk to other students and to talk to their teacher about their writing. Dan talked about how the coaching tool matches so well with the writing module. And that was something, Jan, that struck me. Like, I like that all of the different developmental phases are represented here on this coaching tool. And so we don't forget that with our very youngest children, that there are a lot of foundational things that have to be in place. And so it is a longer tool, like Anisha warned us about, but it's really rich. And I think that we have to just keep reminding ourselves that we don't have to use all of it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I think especially when you think about this as truly a coaching tool, it is, it's always just kind of ongoing. It's never really we've checked all the boxes and we're done with it. This is something that you're continuing to utilize. And so it's okay if it's messy. It's okay if it's, there, no matter how many pages, because we're constantly going back to it. We're revising, we're getting, and changing and doing different things. And so coaching can be messy.
Mm-hmm.
We all know that.
Yeah, I want to name the flip side of focusing on a part of it, which I know is something we've said all along, is like you can just use the coaching tool for like a section.
Yeah.
You could also, though, I think the comprehensiveness of it would lend itself well to like a lesson study type situation of recording a master teacher or recording the teacher that you're coaching and then watching their instruction back through together through the lens of the entire piece.
Love that.
I think that's more accomplishable than trying to do this entire form in like a 20-minute visit to a classroom.
Great point. Yes. And then to your point, Nick, it also reminds us of what should be happening kind of comprehensively, right? So yes, that's a great point. Great point. All right. So to kind of wrap up our time, let's go ahead and share the writing Jamboard so you all can get any thoughts kind of in writing on the Jamboard for yourself, for our colleagues here, maybe the colleagues who couldn't join us. Please share what you plan on starting, stopping, continuing, changing when it comes to writing based off of anything that we said here today, anything that kind of bubbled up for you from the course, from something that somebody said. We'll give you a moment just to kind of get your thoughts written down on the Jamboard. All right, we have utilizing the coaching tool to help with teacher clarity. Teacher clarity was one of the things that we talked a lot about today. So definitely something that we want to make sure that we start if we haven't been doing that, or maybe continue. Using the writing tool as a reflection tool is a way to look at writing as a whole. With teachers, yes. Ooh, the writing tool is a reflection tool. I like that. Focus on it.
I love that idea of using the pre-assessment writing as a guide to like hone in on where you want to have a starting point. And I think it's a yin and yang to like using those pieces and using it more holistically. I think that we got to find, the balance there. They're both so important, and you can, I guess, accomplish different goals with both of those things.
Yes, I agree, Amy.
Yeah, that's a great one about rubrics.
Using rubrics to help teachers know, help them know where to start. Help them maybe become a little bit more comfortable with, with teaching writing, especially if it's not an area that they're super confident in. Incorporating writing skills and strategies in student conferences. Model writing lessons for teachers. Excellent. So a thing I kind of want to, the sticky note about student conferences kind of brought up. So there are some times where I will hear certain terminology and it will kind of bring me back to this, the conversation we were talking about earlier, like balanced literacy, right? And so I have to kind of stop myself and remind myself. So when I hear like student conferences, I automatically kind of go back to workshop a little bit. And, but again, there's nothing wrong with meeting with students and working with them one-on-one about their writing. There's nothing wrong with that. And so that's just kind of a transparent moment that bubbled up for me, that I think we have to remind teachers as well and leaders that it just can't be a blanketed verbiage, of a word or a term that is bad per se.
Yep. And conferences aren't only allowable, they're necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is the way that
Yes.
you are going to move students. You can
Absolutely.
model until you run out of breath, but until you confer with the child,
Yes.
you aren't going to see the change.
Absolutely, 120%. All
Yeah.
right. Oh,
These
go ahead, Amy.
jam boards today are so rich.
Yeah.
So thank y'all for that. I'm taking screenshots so that I can be sure and use them again. So thank y'all for these rich jam boards.
Yes.
Mhm.
And
Agreed.
please continue to add to it. I will again send it out. I'll send it to Amy for her to send out to you all so you guys can kind of have everything collected for you. All right, and I believe we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I think we have about 5 minutes. So, Amy, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, so we'll just check ourselves to make sure that we had a chance to reflect on this month's knowledge about writing and reading comprehension. I think we've had just great conversation and learning together today. We actually got to all 4 of our scenarios today.
Yes.
That's a first. So maybe we found the sweet spot there.
Yes.
And hopefully you feel more prepared to support and lead your districts in this work and to provide the support that it's going to be so important for them.
And I do, if I'm not mistaken, Sam, do we have a quick poll to launch for everybody? Maybe not. I could be wrong. Oh, there it is.
There it is.
And this is just 2 questions. It just kind of helps us to know, what you all need, if it was helpful, if we can do anything differently, because we know your time is important and valuable. We want it to be helpful for you. All right. I think we can go to the next slide. Or maybe we need to wait. I'm not sure.
I think that maybe our next one is.
Oh, sorry, guys. There we go.
Okay. You're fine, Sam. You have all the hard work in the background. So,
I had covered up never mind. The poll launched and it covered up something. I didn't know where we were.
it's
Sorry.
all good. So next month, we are going to be talking about vocabulary and meaningful read alouds. And so please complete that coursework before our session. And y'all, just as a reminder, we have canceled, or we haven't, our partners at West Georgia RESA, we've canceled the Heads Together for the 12th of June. And so, so we're going to keep our time for June 12th from 9 to 10:30, and you won't miss Heads Together. I'm so sad. I'm going to miss being with y'all next month because I've got to be at another early literacy network convening. And the meaningful read alouds is one of my favorite modules. So I'm sad I'm going to miss y'all's great conversation about that. July 10th will be our last session together, and we are changing that time to accommodate Heads Together. And so our July 10th time frame will be 10:30 to 12. So you'll have a little short break between Heads Together and our final wrap up. And I think that maybe that finishes us out.
I think so. So if you guys have any questions, myself, Amy, and Nick, we can stay on. But if not, we will see you all in June. Thank you so much for a wonderful session. It's wonderful because of you all. Thank you for engaging with us. That makes all the difference. And if you need anything, let us know. But until next month, have a great day, y'all.